Hello, this is Graeme Park, and you're listening to the House Culture Podcast.
House Culture.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the House Culture Podcast, hosted by me, the managing editor at House Culture, Matt Rouse. As ever, I hope you're all managing to stay safe in your bubbles out there. I hope we can cure some of that frustration you might be having by delivering some good vibes from the club directly into your lockdown life at home. If you're a returning listener, thanks once again for tuning in, and I hope you have enjoyed the stories that have been told on the podcast during this second season from such personalities as David Morales, Fatboy Slim, Danny Rampling, Dawn Hindle, Bongo Ben, Ashley Beadle and Smoking Joe. Also, if you haven't already, get digging through our first season where we chatted to legends such as Terry Farley, Brandon Block and Danny Clockwork. And if you're not already familiar with house culture and what we stand for, we are a collective of house music fans who've come together through our mutual love of the beat to celebrate the spirit of house music. Instagram is our home at houseculture.net. That's where you can get up close and personal with us and like-minded individuals from across the world. Let's get on with this next episode, yes? In this one, which is the penultimate episode in our second season, we chat to a DJ who, through his residency at the legendary Hacienda in Manchester, is one of the founding fathers of the house music scene in the UK. I'm so proud to announce that it's Graeme Park. In this chat, we find out how Graeme landed his first DJ gigs and discovered a passion for being behind the decks.
And then the owner of the record shop just came in one day and said, I bought a nightclub. We're like, who are you going to get to DJ? And he said, you. I'm like, no. He goes, no, but the music you play in the shop, I think is fantastic. So that's why I ended up not being asked, being told that I would be DJing at the club. And within 6 weeks, I realised that I love DJing.
The changes that this new thing called house wrought on the clubbing scene back in the late 80s.
So we go into the Hacienda on that night and it's like, oh my God, what's happened here? Everyone looked the right state. It was like baggy clothes, smiley logos, bandanas, dungarees. I'm like, what the hell? But they all had, without exception, everybody had this wild look in their eyes. And I'm like, what the hell?
And how he approaches building a set that pleases an up-for-it crowd on the dance floor.
What I love doing is digging out the old tunes that people have forgotten about. Because let's face it, there's enough DJs who are more than happy to play the obvious classics. But when you dig out the ones that people have forgotten about, that when they hear them, they're like, oh, I've not heard this for 25 years. That's what I love doing.
So I hope you enjoy this, as it's my pleasure to introduce Graeme Park.
House Culture.
Hi Graeme.
Hello.
Hello. Thanks so much for joining us on the House Culture Podcast. It's much appreciated. You're a DJ that has witnessed and had a massive hand in the birth of the house music scene in the UK. Not only were you one of the resident DJs at the legendary Hacienda in Manchester, but you've also exported this scene to many places around the world, whether that's through DJing or performing at the Hacienda Classical event. Obviously, we want to talk about all of that, but we also like to start at the beginning. Can you tell us about your first experiences with music when you were growing up?
I was listening to Radio 1. My mum and dad always had Radio 1 on in the house. I was born in the 60s. And I remember the very late 60s and early 70s having the radio on all the time and just loving the pop music because the variety of music on Radio 1 then was just amazing. But also my mum used to be a singer, and my late grandpa had his own orchestra, the George Wood Orchestra. And when I was 11, he gave me his clarinet because he had really bad arthritis, so he couldn't play anymore. And he gave me his clarinet when I was 11. So I learned clarinet, ended up playing in the school orchestra, third clarinet, which is the most boring, because you're just playing kind of the odd note to back up second clarinet and first clarinet. First clarinet gets all the great lines. Second clarinet's quite good, but I was third clarinet. But in 1977, discovered the Damned, the Clash, the Sex Pistols, and I was like, oh my God. All my friends at school were into progressive rock, which I couldn't abide because I just generally like pop music. I couldn't abide progressive rock. I mean, now I'm older, I get it, but they loved it. Genesis, particularly, I just thought it was awful. So I totally embraced punk rock, and then that, of course, meant when I heard X-Ray Specs, Old Bondage Up Yours, and the saxophone on that, I just thought, oh, I could play that on my clarinet, and I did. So then I decided I wanted to save up and buy a saxophone.
No way.
Now, in 1977, I was 14, doing lots of jobs here and there. Because employment law was different then. I got a Saturday job when I was 14 or 15 in the local independent record shop, which is called Bruce's.
Yeah. Where was this, sorry?
In Kirkcaldy, in Scotland.
Yeah.
And to get that job, I mean, the reason I got it is because I was always in there buying like every new punk record that came out. And they kind of got to know me. And then one day I walked in and said, listen, you always buy pretty good records. Do you want a Saturday job? And I was like, oh my God, yes. So then suddenly there I was working on Saturdays in a record shop, saving up money to buy my first saxophone and getting staff discount on all the records that I wanted to buy. I suppose without realizing it, that was me set on the path of making music my career, but not actually realizing it. So I got my first saxophone and I started learning to play along with all the punk records I liked. And then eventually my family moved to the East Midlands. I stayed in Scotland, but then joined them after a while. And then when I was in the East Midlands, went to college and then met other people who had similar taste in music. And this was like 79, 80, 81. So punk had started to kind of morph into new wave.
Yeah.
And started to play in bands. The bands we played in, we were trying to be like, I don't know, Talking Heads or the Blow Monkeys or Blondie, stuff like that. So I always liked Talking Heads because they had a bit of funk and a bit of soul to them. Because one thing I haven't mentioned was that while I absolutely embraced punk rock, I always quietly, because it wasn't very cool to say this at the time as a punk rocker, but I always quite liked disco as well. Probably because my mom and dad used to play Motown records a lot and Stax records a lot. So that's why I like Talking Heads. And then you realize that music's not black and white. You can't just like one type of music because everything's connected. I mean, like Blondie's Heart of Glass is just a disco record, but they were kind of seen as this kind of New York new wave band. So anyway, I was quite happy to connect all the pieces, and I played in bands. I ended up in Nottingham, and because again, got a job in selector because I was always in the shop buying records. And one day, and I told them I'd worked in a record shop when I was at school. And one day I walked in and said, "Listen, we're short staffed today. Do you want to help out?" I'm like, "Yeah." So that ended up running the singles department and secondhand department.
Oh, no way.
And then the owner of the record shop, whose office was on the same floor as the floor I worked on, just came in one day and said, I've bought a nightclub, the Ad Lib Club, which is a reggae club.
Yeah. And
we're like, oh my God, you fool. Why have you bought that club? Well, I'm going to change its name. I'm going to turn it into this cool underground club. And we're like, well, who are you going to get to DJ? And he said, you. I'm like, no. I'm not a DJ. I play in bands. Yeah. He goes, no, but the music you play in the shop, I think is fantastic. Because as a singles buyer, I was playing lots of new singles.
Yeah.
And as a second-hand buyer, people would come in with these amazing classic albums, singles of all genres. And I'd say, oh my God, look at this. It's The Doors, or it's a salsa album or whatever, and play them in the shop. And so that's why I ended up not being asked, being told that I would be DJing at the club. But because I was only 19 or 20, I didn't want to lose my job. So I reluctantly agreed. And within 6 weeks, I realized that I love DJing.
Yeah.
And judging from the response I was getting from the audience, I was pretty good at it. So I gave up playing in bands, which did not go down well with the main band I was in, because we'd had record companies coming up to Nottingham to see us play live. Yeah. And so the band were really annoyed because I was lead singer.
Oh, no way. Okay. So you weren't playing sax in the band then? You were
I was doing lead vocals, saxophone, occasionally a bit of guitar. I was basically showing off. And eventually, in one of the bands, I bought a Roland SH101 synthesizer just so I could play some kind of synthy bass notes and synthy noises, because I really liked, Human League and Cabaret Voltaire. So I was not very popular, but then I became a DJ and then realized that I loved it. And then for the next 3 or 4 years, I worked in the record shop 6 days a week, 5 days a week, running that department, which was great. If you're a DJ, if you're on the second-hand department, you're a DJ. Wow, fantastic. Then in late 85, early 86, all these obscure early house tracks started to appear. And of course, I would just say on the phone to the distributor, just give me one of each. Yeah. Everyone in the shop, when I played them, said, "Oh my God, what's this rubbish?" I went, "It's great." And then house music kind of started to trickle in from Chicago and Detroit. Yeah. And then it took over. And then before I knew it, people started traveling to hear me DJ in Nottingham. So I had to give up working in the record shop, which didn't go down well with the record shop. And then mid 80s, so from 86 onwards, I ended up doing Wednesday nights at the Lead Mill in Sheffield. Yeah. Thursday nights at the Fan Club in Leicester. Mm-hmm. Fridays at the garage in Nottingham, and Saturdays at the garage in Nottingham. And then, of course, in 1988, after having met Mike Pickering in 87 at a photo shoot in London for ID magazine, got asked to cover for him at Hacienda, and then ended up staying. So that was my journey to being a DJ and the Hacienda.
Yeah, it's to have all of that grounding and musical education, like you say, everything's kind of connected musically, and you were kind of almost like building your rep. And road testing stuff, I suppose, in this record store that you were working in, putting things together that you might not have necessarily thought about doing so in a live environment, in a club.
Well, how I always approached DJing was I would hear other DJs and, they just play one record after the other. But I had a friend of mine who moved to New York when he was a teenager. And we kept in touch. It was in the days when you used to write letters to people and send them. And then I'd get my letter from New York, I'd read it and go, "Oh, great," and then write a letter back. And he started sending me cassettes of mix shows. So you had WBLS and Kiss FM. Yeah. And Tony Humphries had a mix show. Frankie Knuckles had a mix show. And Marley Marl had a mix show, and he used to send me those. And I would listen to what they did, whether it was hip hop or disco or early house, and go, "Oh, I see what they're doing. They're just like matching the records, beat mixing. Yeah. I reckon I could do that because I'm a musician." So I started doing that, and that's what people started hearing, that this guy, this balding white Scottish guy, was playing this stuff like no one else was. And also, there was a big Midlands soul all-dayer scene, Rock City in Nottingham, Powerhouse in Birmingham, The Place in Stoke-on-Trent, big soul all-dayer scenes. And they kind of, the DJs, they played a lot of early house tunes. And I would go down to Rock City, but it struck me that they would just play a track and talk on the mic, and then play the next track and talk on the mic. Yeah. And somebody said, "Oh, you should be DJing at these events." But then the organisers were like, "Well, you can't because you don't use the mic." I'm like, "Yeah, but why should I use the mic?" Because it gets the crowd going. Yeah. Then I put this argument that if they did let me go on, I guarantee I would get the crowd going without using the mic. So they thought, "Well, okay, we'll put you on early doors, not peak time." So they put me on early doors. I just used to make, because it was quite early, I just played loads of hip hop in 2 copies and cut them up. Yeah. Then introduced some house music, and everyone was going crazy because now technology means that anybody can mix 2 records together. There's no excuse. If you hear a DJ who can't mix now, you think, "Well, come on, mate." But back then, mixing wasn't a thing, and there was a lot less DJs than there are now, and a lot less clubs to play at. And you really did make a name for yourself based on your merit and your skill. There was no social media, there was no DJs were less narcissistic than they are today, and word just spread around. And I remember the first time I played in New York, which was in February 89 at the Mars Club. And a lot of people were like, "Oh, here we are, another British DJ." No, hang on. They would say another English DJ. I said, "Well, can I just stop you there? I'm not English. I'm Scottish, right?" Mm-hmm. "Oh, yeah, but you're British. You British guys, you can't mix." I'm like, "Well, just wait until I DJ." And then I went on in New York, and everyone was just going, "Oh my God, you can mix." And that, to me, that was like, I kind of felt that I knew what I was doing, because if the home of clubbing,
Yeah.
disco slash, the clubbing, the British clubs like the Hacienda was like kind of based on the fact that New Order went to Studio 54 and the Loft, and we're like, we want to do that in Manchester. So I was in New York getting respect from people, and then I did a month. I used to go to the Mars Club like once a month for a couple of years. With a DJ called Mark Kamens, the late Mark Kamens, would fly me out there to play there. And then one month I was there, I'm like, Mark, that looks like Arthur Baker, because that is Arthur Baker. And that looks like John Jellybean Benitez. It is John Benitez. And who's the other guy with him? Well, that's John Roby. And John Roby is a producer that I was a massive fan of, because there was a band called C Bank, and he produced them. And I went, why are they here? And he goes, well, they're here to see you. I'm like, no way. And then I met them. And like, even now, that was 1989. So that's like over 30 years ago. And even now, if I see John Benitez or Arthur Baker, they remember that night. So that was a real buzz. And then, I think that's kind of when I thought, yeah, maybe I'll continue doing this DJ thing for a while. But I never ever, even then, I didn't think, if you'd said to me, you'll be doing this in your 50s, well into the next century, because we are, it's 2020. We are a fifth of the way through the 21st century.
God, yeah.
I know.
Yeah, to put it like that.
Yeah, if you'd said to me when I was sat in maths at Kirkcaldy High School with my mate Alan, you're going to end up traveling the world and DJing, making a living out of DJing. Well into your 50, all right, don't be so stupid. But somehow I still am.
Yeah, and I suppose that feeling of getting recognition from these people that you've heard mixtapes from, or you've seen their names as producers on labels of tracks that you own, and then going over and getting that recognition yourself, that was obviously, like you said, the big boost that made you realise.
It was just a real buzz. I mean, Mark Kamens I was aware of, because he'd done some great stuff. So, and he came to Hacienda and said, I need to get you in New York. But to meet those guys, and then, over the years, Todd Terry's first ever gig in the UK was with me at the Wag Club in London, and he was aware of who I was, which was quite a buzz, because I was like, oh my God, it's Todd Terry. But the thing is, I was just a fan. But you see, nowadays, and lots of up and coming DJs or people who want to make something out of DJing kind of ask me for their advice, and everyone seems so hung up on what everyone else is doing, right? Now, I just had a load of records, a real eclectic selection of records, and various residencies. And I would just play records I liked. And I'm very lucky that the records I played, which I liked, the audiences who came to see me liked them as well. And there was never any grand master plan of, this is what I'm going to do for the next 5 years. And I never, ever did it for the money. Yeah, okay, when I was doing 4 or 5 gigs a week, and my fee increased something like 500% in the space of 2 years, that's when I thought, well, yes, so maybe I can make a living out of this. But I was just having a great time. I didn't really care what other DJs were doing. Like now, look, I mean, if you go to TrackSource, I find it highly, I'm in TrackSource quite a lot. I find it really irritating that you cannot get away from these banners flashing, this DJ's top 10, that DJ's top 10. I'm not interested.
Yeah.
But I know people are.
Yeah.
I just wish they wouldn't. Just find things you like and go with it. Yeah. Now, inevitably, that you're obviously going to play stuff that other people are, but I just don't look at charts at all. And people say, oh, why do you never do charts on TrackSource or Beatport? Well, I do occasionally. When I think I've got like 10 records that perhaps have been overlooked by everyone else, then I might do a chart. But because I'm not prolific doing a chart on TrackSource, that's why it doesn't come up flashing in your face. So, but that suits me fine.
Yeah, and it's about having that creativity, like you said, going with what you feel is right and being that tastemaker and having confidence in that. I think is great. And you don't want to be going onto TrackSource and being like, okay, I'm just going to download, I like this DJ, I'm just going to download their top 10 and then that's what I'm going to play. There's no excitement or discovery in that. There's nothing better than flicking through records and picking something out that you just have a feeling will sound good listening to it, and it taking you by surprise and you've never heard anyone else play it, but you like it, so go with it.
Absolutely. And then back in the days of vinyl, when the postman used to have to knock on the door and give me like a daily basis, like a big massive pile of mailers with vinyl in. I used to be very, very specific about this. I would open the mailer and take the record out, and records always came with a sheet of A4 paper with, this is the new single from, remixed by, and a great loads of PR nonsense. I would always open the record and play it before reading what it was. Now, if it's a white label, that was really exciting because you wouldn't know who it was at all. If it had stuff stamped on it, you go, okay, this is a new single from so-and-so or whatever, but never read the thing. And then what I would try and do would be listen to each record on its merits. So I don't read the PR, just listen to it on its merits. And what that often meant was sometimes I'd go, I don't really like this. Nah, it's a bit generic. I can imagine it'll be a big record, but I'm not feeling it. And then you pick up the thing and go, oh my God, it's Paul Oakenfold's remix this. I don't like, I'm not picking on him. It could be, there's been Masters at Work remixes of tracks. I think this sounds a bit like it's trying to be like Masters at Work. Oh, it is. But I find it much harder to do that today because everyone sends promos via email. I've got one email address that's just for promos. So if I just look at it now, there's over 100 that have just come today. And so I can't listen to all of them. So I'll scroll down and I'll pick up the promo companies or the labels or the names I recognize. But I don't like doing that because in an ideal world, I just listen to everything and pick the things I like.
Yeah.
But you can't. There's so many people making music, which is fine. Technology has democratized the whole process. But what it means is, I think, there's more people making lots of very average music. Whereas 25 years ago, it would cost you money to put something out. So you're not going to waste money on something that's average. And a record company, you would need a record company to put something out. And a record company are not going to invest in you. They're not going to pay studio time. They're not going to pay for adverts. They're not going to pay someone to promote your record if it's an average record. So although the A&R process has had a lot of criticism in the past 20 odd years, and people say, well, who needs A&R people? Who needs record companies? We're going to do it ourselves. Great. And there are great examples of small labels that have gone on to become very, very big. Simon Dunmore famously left a high-paying job to set up Defected. Defected, incredible. But for every amazing independent digital-only record label there is, there's probably about 500 average ones. And I'm not knocking it. I'm just saying I do miss the old days when most things that got released were released to do well and get a return on people's investments. So I miss those days. But having said that, I still enjoy every now and then. I'll go, right, for the next 4 hours, I'm going to switch my phone onto Do Not Disturb, put my headphones on, and I'm just going to go through and listen to as many things as I can. And yes, I do find some real gems. But you do rely on the good promo companies and the good labels to give you those headlines.
Yeah, and to give you a good filter. But it's good that you still find it exciting, and to be able to dedicate that time for the discovery is something that keeps it fresh for you.
No, not as much time as I'd like because of other commitments, but you've got to do it from time to time because you don't know. That's why I became a DJ. That's why I got into music, is to discover new things, which is why it gets slightly irritating when I'm DJing and everyone's going crazy. You're playing new stuff or a great new track that you've discovered and everyone's going crazy. And then one person, usually slightly over 45, shall we say, will manage to clamber up to the DJ box and go, and they're always from the north. Parkie, come on, get some proper classics on. But look at the dance floor. No, get this rubbish off. Get some proper Hacienda tunes on. Which, if they just be patient, I probably will at some point. Because these days, you got to play to the crowd in front of you. I never turn up to any gig with an agenda or an idea of what I'm going to do because you don't know who's going to be there. In the past 4 or 5 years, our Hacienda club nights, the audience seems to be getting younger. Well, that's great because it means if you've got a younger audience, you can play more contemporary things. However, what I love doing is digging out the old tunes that people have forgotten about. Because let's face it, there's enough DJs of my generation who are more than happy to play the obvious classics,
Mm-hmm.
which is why I rarely play the obvious ones, because you know that someone else on the bill is going to play them.
Yeah.
But when you dig out the ones that people remember, they've forgotten about them, but when they hear them, they're like, "Oh, I've not heard this for 25 years."
Yeah.
That's what I love doing. But even then, you'll always get that one person going, "Get some proper Hacienda classics on." Well, this was a massive tune in 1992. Oh, no, not this. Get something obvious on. Okay, off you go.
Yeah, it must be frustrating. But yeah, like you say, you play to a crowd and everyone's got to be happy. I mean, if we circle back to you did mention Mike Pickering and the Hacienda originally. How did that connection originally arise? Had you already been to the Hacienda as a punter?
Oh gosh, yeah. When I was working in Selector Disc in Nottingham, I would quite often go up to Manchester to Hacienda to watch bands live, because I was a big Factory Records fan, and I also loved the Sheffield scene as well. So Human League, Cabaret Voltaire, and I used to get the train up to see bands at Hacienda. I saw New Order there, Cabaret Voltaire, Orange Juice, Aztec Camera, Joseph K, Crispy Ambulance. They were on Factory Records, a certain ratio. And I was aware of Mike Pickering because he was in a band called Quando Quango. And I really liked Quando Quango and played their records when I was in my DJ sets. Love Tempo by Quando Quango, great record. And then Mike became part of a band called T-Coy, who released Carino, which is one of the first British house records, which I used to play as well. So I was aware of him. And in 1987, we both got invited to London by ID magazine to take part in a photo shoot about these new breed of DJ who didn't use the mic and played really weird stuff. And me and him were the only DJs in that photo shoot who were not from the Southeast.
Okay.
So you had Judge Jules, Mark Moore, Jay Strongman, Norman J, Jazzy M, Nicky Holloway. So we all kind of met in the. If you look online, I'm sure you can find it. It's like we're all dead young looking. This was 1987. So 1987, I was 23, 24, and we all looked very fresh faced, and we're dressed straight. Our look is just so 1987. They had this scaffolding. We're all climbing on this scaffolding. But Mike and I, because we were the only non-South people from the Southeast and everyone else knew each other, we kind of hit it off. And he was aware of me. He said, "Oh, yeah, I'm aware of what you do at the garage in Nottingham." And I started to play more house music at Hacienda. I went, "Really?" Because when I used to at Hacienda, the club nights were rubbish. He goes, "Oh, no, it's more of a club now." And we shared a taxi back to the Euston Road because he was getting the train home from Euston Station and I was getting the train home from St Pancras Station. So we exchanged numbers and kept in touch. And then he contacted me and said, "I think we should put on a night at Hacienda called the Northern House Review," because we both agreed that the music media, all the magazines, were very London-centric and were oblivious to what was happening outside the M25, because this was that ridiculous myth. Well, not a myth. It's the story that certain DJs from London went to Ibiza and discovered house music. After we'd been playing it in the north for about 2 years before that. I mean, they did go and they didn't discover it. They heard it and thought, "Oh, this is great." You can't deny that. But the spin that they brought it to the UK is nonsense. So we put on this Northern House Review, and a lot of the media came up. It was a Tuesday night or a Wednesday night in February '88. And it was like, "Oh my God, this is incredible." And then, like I said earlier, Mike rang me up and said, "Will you cover for me when I go on holiday?" And I ended up staying. So, but then it was weird because I'm hanging out with Tony Wilson, the bloke from the telly who ran Factory Records, and hanging out with New Order, who I was a big fan of. And then, meeting people who would end up being, like the Gallagher brothers and Sean Ryder and Bez and Rowetta and all those people and Clint Boone. So it's quite bizarre, but great. And again, there's another point where I thought, maybe this is going to be what I end up doing,
Yeah. And those kind of early parties in the beginning, like how quickly did you see things changing in the club in terms of the music you were playing, the people attending, the fashions that people were wearing? Was it kind of an overnight sensation or was it a gradual build?
There was quite a quick change because in February '88, when Mike and I did this Northern House Review, it was just a great night with a great vibe and a real mix of people. But when he said to me, "You got to come up to the Hacienda and see what's happening before you cover for me. I said, why? That Northern House review was great. He said, no, that was in February. This is May. Things are a bit different. I'm like, how? Well, if you don't come up, you're not covering for me. Okay. So I went up. I had to take the night off to go up. And it was different because I walked into Hacienda about midnight, no, about 11, and it was packed. And everyone was dressed differently. And see, in Nottingham, Mike was playing pretty much the same music as I was in Nottingham at the garage. The difference was I was playing to 500 people in an upstairs, low-ceilinged room. Everyone was crammed in. Mike was playing to 2,000 people in the Hacienda, this big industrial kind of space. And everyone in Nottingham, like most clubs at the time, were dressed like they'd walked straight out of the pages of ID magazine. Very, very kind of designer and very cool in a street way. So go up to the Hacienda on that night, and I go in the door, and it's like, oh my God, what's happened here? Everyone looked a right state. There was like baggy clothes, smiley logos, bandanas, dungarees. I'm like, what the hell? Men in dungarees, what's happened? But they all had, without exception, everybody had this wild look in their eyes. And I'm like, what the hell? And I go up to the DJ box. It was in the days when I could walk through the Hacienda and not get pestered by anyone, not get mithered by anyone.
Yeah.
A few weeks after I started, I couldn't do that because it's like Parkie. But anyway, I get to the DJ box, knock on the door. Mike opens the door, and he's got that wild look in his eyes. I'm like, what's going on? And of course, I go in the DJ box. He goes, this is why you had to come up before you do it. And then explained that everyone had taken this little pill, ecstasy. And I can remember pretty much really clearly. There's lots of things I've forgotten in life, but I remember that night really well. And the following 3 Fridays when I did it on my own, I remember those nights as well. It was incredible. But this was when ecstasy had started to spread. And within 6 to 8 weeks of me doing the Hacienda, people in Nottingham would come up. Oh, Parkie's at the Hacienda. Let's go and check him out at Hacienda, and go, what the hell? Yeah. And discovered ecstasy. Equally, there were people, I've never really told this story, but there was like people in Manchester who were asking me lots of questions about Nottingham. What's the club called? Where is it? Can you put me on the guest list? And then coming down, they were drug dealers basically with ecstasy, and introducing that to Nottingham. So within 6 weeks, my well-dressed fashionista crowd had turned all baggy and had that same wild-eyed look in their face. And then before you knew it, it was Wednesday night Sheffield, Thursday night Leicester, Friday night Manchester, Saturday night Nottingham. You know what I mean? Everyone like completely wild-eyed. It was amazing. And it did, and then it spread around the country, and eventually got to London. No, it did spread. It did spread really quickly. It really did.
Yeah, like you said, to go from kind of February to May that quickly, and like the music that you were playing. You know, you mentioned before about, you know, you'd be playing sometimes hip hop and whatever, and you listen to some of the surviving kind of tapes from that early era, and you know, it's not necessarily house music all night long. Was that just a symptom of there not being much around, or you just wanted to keep it eclectic? And what was the kind of policy?
I always like to keep it eclectic, but by the time you got to late 88, and certainly by the summer of 89, there was just so much house music, and the tempo, everything went up and up and up. That's probably due to the fact that everyone was off their heads. But when Mike and I played together, and we never played together, we'd take it in turns. When I did those 3 Fridays when Mike was away, I kind of warmed up for myself. So that's why those early tapes are a bit more eclectic, because people are coming in and I'm keeping it laid back. And then in 92, when Mike went off to do M People and I moved to Saturdays, I had Tom Wainwright would warm up, but then I would take over and do 4 or 5 hours. And so then I went back to kind of mixing it up a bit, you know. But the way things have turned out in clubs in the past, certainly the past 10 years, is clubs tend to want more DJs on the bill.
Yeah.
So the longest you get to DJ now is 2 hours. Some places, like I won't mention the particular brands, but some club brands just want a massive lineup. You get an hour. I hate that.
An hour's not long enough at all.
It's not. But sometimes you have to do it because it's a big event, right? But very occasionally, I get the opportunity to do a long set. Now, I recently did a 12-hour set online.
Yes, yeah, I saw that.
I loved that because I literally didn't play any house music. I started at midday. I didn't play any house music until 9:30 at night. So I did the last 2.5 hours of house, but the first 9.5 hours of soul, funk, disco, bit of pop music, go-go, hip hop. And I loved that. That's what I used to play in my early days. You know, I mean, like I dropped Talking Heads, I dropped Blondie, I dropped some Chuck Brown and the Soul Searchers, all the old go-go stuff, and then the early hip hop, and even things like Ian Dury and the Blockheads and Texas and Duran Duran. I figured if we got 12 hours, I may as well have fun.
Yeah, yeah.
And everyone loved it.
So what would you say is the perfect set length then? Like an hour is too short, 2 hours is maybe okay.
Yeah, 2 hours is okay because even then you're still getting into it. I mean, even in a 2 hour set, it takes you half an hour to find your feet, get in the groove, you know, especially if you're following someone who's got a slightly different style and maybe he's got the energy really at quite a high level, and you've got to follow that. But I personally love a 4, 5, or 6 hour set if I can. I tell you what I do, what a lot of people don't realize is in the past 10 years, I do a lot of private events, like people who celebrate their 40th birthday, or as is happening more recently, their 50th birthday. And they might have done quite well for themselves in life. And they contact say, I don't suppose you do private events. Yes, I do. And then you get paid a lot of money to play at a private event, sometimes in a mansion.
Yeah.
Well, actually, sometimes I mean, I DJ'd at Noel Gallagher's 50th, which was incredible, and that's when I did quite a long set with Mike Pickering. And when you do these private events, if it's a proper club, a real head who used to go to Hacienda or the Garage in Nottingham, they go, listen, just do what you want, do your thing. That's why I want you here. And again, but if you play a private event with an older crowd, then it is all about playing kind of older stuff. And that's when you get to play those tunes that you wouldn't get to play in a 2 hour set. So the longer you get to do it, the better.
Yeah. And you can kind of, like, say, warm yourself up. And
absolutely.
Yeah. So you were a resident at the Hacienda for 9 years.
Yeah. I mean, 88 to 92, it closed for about 3 months because of the well-documented gang and violent problems and drug problems.
Yeah.
When it reopened, Mike decided he wanted to go and do something else, and then I moved to Saturdays, and then I stayed till the end in '97 when the physical venue closed because it was so badly run, and it just went bust. But the last kind of year that it was open, I stopped doing weekly Saturdays because I was turning down so many amazing offers from other clubs like Ministry of Sound, Cream, Renaissance, Gatecrasher, and turning down more and more stuff abroad. So I went monthly for the last year. I went monthly. So I wasn't there on the last night because it wasn't one of my nights. And nobody knew it was going to be the last night until it was the last night. And I remember people faxing me or phoning me on my old mobile phone saying, oh, you must be gutted. I went, not really. I think I'm quite a bit of a relief that it's gone now. But of course it didn't go because 97 is when the building closed. By 2002, people had started doing these unofficial Hacienda nights. And because Peter Hook he was quite clever and he registered the name as a brand. He's like, well, if people are doing these unofficial nights, they've got to stop. Maybe we should do a Hacienda night. So we did. It was amazing. And that was just 5 years after it closed.
Yeah.
And then we did the odd one, but then from about 2012 onwards, we started doing like 2 or 3 Hacienda nights in Manchester and more around the country. And it's now, it's back where it was, like a major British club brand. And then, of course, as you said at the start, we ended up doing Hacienda Classical, partly because all those slightly annoying middle-aged people who just want to hear me play the obvious classics, they're one of the reasons why we did Hacienda Classical. Well, if they want to hear the obvious classics, I don't want to DJ, I don't want to play them, but what if we did them on a different way with an orchestra? So I thought we'll do it as a one-off and see how it goes. Anyway, it ended up being a 4-year tour. But now, if people come up to me and go, oh, why don't you play some obvious ones? I go, well, come and see Hacienda Classical, fill your boots, you'll be happy. But it's been massive. It's been massive. And I'm more than happy to perform those songs with a 70-piece orchestra and a choir.
Yeah.
It's amazing. It really is. It's like reimagining them and reinventing them.
Yeah. And, giving them a life that they would never have had in terms of that live environment, because before it would have just been someone just playing it on a record.
Exactly. It was Peter Hook who realised this. We were like halfway through our first year of touring, and he went, "You know what? Correct me if I'm wrong, but I bet these songs have never been performed live." I thought, no, they might have been done as PAs where the singer sang them live over a DAT tape of the instrumental, or never performed live. And they were all made in studios on very cheap budgets using cheap synthesizers mainly. So yeah, you're right. And when Marshall Jefferson comes along and hears 3 of his songs being performed with an orchestra and says he got tears in his eyes, that's quite good. But then each year the shows got kind of bigger and better. So the first year was just like 90 minutes of tracks from the late 80s and early 90s. As each show has progressed, I've kind of widened rather than stick to a one period. I mean, like last year's show had a couple of 70s disco tracks in, and a couple of more contemporary tracks in, and everything in between.
Yeah.
Including, we did a version of Rock the Casbah one year, which I had to sing, which was great.
Oh, amazing.
And when Peter Hook because Peter Hook tours with his band The Light. So there was one show where he couldn't do the show. And of course, everyone was like, who's going to do Blue Monday? And the conductor and the girl who leads the choir, Audrey Mattis and Tim Crooks, said to me, you do it. I did it at a sound check once for a laugh. And because of that, so that was great. So I've ended up singing Blue Monday when Peter Hook can't do the show, which is quite a buzz to sing a song that you absolutely love in a show, and I'm singing it with an orchestra and a choir. Wow. It's amazing. But so funnily enough, although I never wanted to be a DJ, I wanted to play in a band. I wanted to be in a rock band or a pop band. But I got sidetracked by DJing for 35 years. And 35 years later, I've gone back to playing in a band, albeit on a much larger scale. I've done Rock the Casbah, Blue Monday, and then we do a version of Brand New Heavy's Back to Love based on the remix I did. Yeah. And when I said, we'll in last year's show, let's do that. And all the girls in our 3 singers, like Yvonne Shelton, Melanie Williams, and Ray Hall, they all said, you should sing the male part in Back to Love because it's based on your remix. I went, I don't think I could do that. Anyway, I tried it, and everyone said, "Yeah, you can." So that's so it's quite funny to be able to go back and be in a band again.
Yeah, to scratch that itch, I suppose. Yeah, and in terms of choosing the set list, I mean, I did go to the one you guys did at the Royal Albert Hall. I think it was 16. The first track was Tikoi Carino.
Let me tell you, that was a show that was supposed to be a one-off, and then it was 2 shows because the first one was a disaster, so we did it 2 weeks later, and then we were asked to do it at some other places, and then we ended up at the Royal Albert Hall. And I remember about 20 minutes into that show at the Royal Albert Hall going, no, this is just not right, because this was supposed to be a one-off. This wasn't supposed to be a tour. And I think the show could be 10 times better than it is. And that was 20 minutes into the Royal Albert Hall show. Yeah. At the end of the year, Peter Hook said, we're going to do it again. And I said, right, I've got to change it, everything. And he was like, why? That means more costs. I went, it'll be worth it. And the second year show, 2017 show, was by far and away far superior to the first year's show. And then because it went down so well, it meant that every year I keep having to change it, which Peter Hook hates, because when you introduce new tracks, you got to pay to get them scored and arranged. Okay. And then all the stuff the orchestra can't do, which is all the electronic stuff, I have to go into a studio with someone and recreate it. Well, there's a cost to that as well. So without Peter Hook, we couldn't do it. We couldn't do it because of the cost. But it's kind of worked out well. And it's really disappointing that we couldn't do this year. I mean, totally understandable, because this year's show was, again, I think, a better show with some new songs in there. Obviously, there are some songs you've got to keep because people expect them. But unlike other, shall I say any names, other inferior dance music classical shows that just do the same set every year, I couldn't do that. Yeah. I'd feel like a fraud. I really would. I do think, like being a DJ, there are some DJs who are happy playing the same set week in, week out. It's a gig, it's a living, but I like to mix it up. So we do that with Hacienda Classical. So this year's show was almost ready. The backing track was almost finished. The scoring and arranging was almost finished. So everything's been on ice. We will resurrect that next year.
Yeah.
But then 2022 is the 40th anniversary of the Hacienda opening.
No way.
Exactly, I know. So that's got to be worth celebrating. So I'm hoping to get permission from Peter Hook to do a whole 100% brand new show in 2022. But we'll see.
Yeah. In terms of actually choosing tracks for the set list, and who's kind of in charge of that? Is it a groupthink mentality, or is it like, I want this one, let's do it?
Well, the first couple of years when Mike Pickering was involved, Mike and I would do it together. But then Mike decided that he wanted to move on and do other stuff. So it's me. I come up with the list, but I have to work with Tim Crooks, the conductor. And so my start point is usually about 60 records. I have to get it down to 20. But then I'll run them past Tim and he'll go, well, most of these are great. There's lots for the orchestra to do. But these ones here, there's absolutely nothing for the orchestra to do.
Right.
So then I have to persuade him to come up with something for the orchestra to do. And he goes, okay. And then he does sometimes, but there's still tracks. There's nothing for the orchestra to do. So we dump them and I carry it and I bring some other ones in. And then once Tim is happy and I'm happy, because at the end of the day, if I'm not happy, it's not going, because I'm not going to mention names, but sometimes people involved in the show will suggest, why don't we do a version of this? And I just go, no, because it's shit, right? Or no, because it's crap. No, because it's so cheesy. Or no, because those other shows, they do those songs. And I don't see the point. I usually get my way, but sometimes I have to be a bit flexible. And then once we're happy with the tracks, I then create a continuous mix. But then Tim might come back and go, right, listen, this mix is great, but do you think you could move these tracks around? Because the key change between them would be better. Okay. And I go, leave it with me. And I'll try them and go, yeah, see, that wouldn't work as a DJ. So what we then do, when we score and arrange them and do the backing track, we'll change the key of the original record. But then whoever's singing it might come and say, I can't sing it in that key. But the other girls don't want to sing it. So then we have to go back to the drawing board and then mess about with keys again. So it's literally from the beginning of January right up to the end of May, there's such a lot of work going on. I mean, it's like 2-3 days a week working on the backing track, and Tim's working on the scoring and arranging, and then we have to send things to the girls and the choir and get their feedback. But we get there in the end. We really do, and it's fantastic.
Looking forward, like you said, that Hacienda kind of taking nights in and around the country. It's like a touring thing now outside of Hacienda Classical. I'm talking about like the big events. Looking forward to next year, obviously 2021. At Tobacco Dock, you guys are doing something on the Good Friday of Easter.
Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed, yeah, this will happen. Are you, forgetting about the current COVID situation, what are your plans for that? Are you thinking of anything exciting, special, or is it just too far to think about at this stage?
The idea is the 3 main nights that Hacienda used to have. Nude on a Friday was me and Mike. Hot on a Wednesday was John De Silva with Mike. And then Flesh, which I suppose you'd now call the LBGTQ night. They were massive nights. And then Tobacco Dock's got 3 arenas. Because like, you know, it's easy just to say, oh, let's put another Hacienda night on. But we always try and mix it up, make things a bit different. So we thought we'd do the 3. So Mike and I are hosting the nude night in the main room with Masters at Work. Wow. John De Silva will be hosting the hot room with Kevin Saunderson and Wayne Atkins. Wow. I can't tell you who the special guests for the Flesh Room are because it's not been announced. It's quite a big deal, but I'll get told off if I announce it now.
Don't worry.
And it's a daytime event. It starts like in the afternoon and finishes by 11 o'clock at night.
Yeah.
So you're going to appeal to the older clubber who thinks, hang on, this is a daytime event. I'll have some of that. But also because of the heritage of the Hacienda, you're going to get that kind of younger crowd who are like, oh my God, it's a Hacienda night in London. Because we haven't done one in London for a while. And the chances are, and I'm pretty sure because it's London, there will be an after party. So you can carry on raving until 6 in the morning. And I'm pretty sure I will more than happily finish at Tobacco Dock and then go and carry on somewhere else. So, but I think it's a celebration. I mean, people will be ready for a bloody great party by then, hopefully.
Yeah.
I mean, some people contacted me going like, how can you be so sure this will happen? Or put in comments like, yeah, if it goes ahead. But you've got to remember the live the live industry, the live sector, it's like the fifth largest industry in the UK,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
It's worth like tens of billions of pounds to the UK economy. Now, yes, we've got a pandemic. Yes, it's terrible, and things aren't going to plan. But then I partly put that blame on our rather inept and shambolic government. But
Mm-hmm.
you cannot just switch off that industry for the long term. You just can't.
No.
I personally have had practically no income since lockdown. I've had 4 gigs at the end of August, right?
Mm-hmm.
All socially distanced, all safe,
Yeah.
smaller capacity, less people.
Mm.
It's not sustainable. So I don't think by the time April comes, I'm pretty positive, and the Hacienda are as well. Otherwise, they wouldn't have gone ahead and announced it, that live entertainment has to be back up and running. It just has to be. Otherwise, my accountant is very much looking forward to me to having something to look forward to.
What were your experiences like playing at those events that were COVID safe? Was it a different feeling?
They were all very different. There was 4 events, right? The first one was in the northeast in a hotel called Hardwick Hall, and it was an outdoor event, massive stage. Well, first Norman J DJ'd, Heather Small played live, then I DJ'd. But there was 800 people, and there were 100 tables outdoors, and each table you had to book as a group of 8, and you had to stay in that group. But you had a little area, you could dance, you had hand sanitizer station at your table. If you went out of your area, put a mask on to go to the bar, go to the toilet. And the atmosphere was amazing. Really good vibe. And it was just great playing live and seeing people. But of course, the thing about my job and anyone who goes clubbing, it's a very kind of social experience. So there's lots of shaking hands and hugging people and hanging out. You couldn't do that. It was all people coming up to me trying to get a selfie, which is fine. But you have to, well, come on, let's just follow the rules, you know. But as people get more and more inebriated, that's when some of the rules get overlooked. But that's what the security are there for. Go, look, come on. And it's all very good natured, unlike the illegal raves that I've been hearing about.
Yeah, it's been interesting how there has been this whole groundswell of illegality again, of people just putting on their own parties and just going for it, for better or worse.
There's a parallel with the illegal rave scene of the late 80s and early 90s, in that original illegal rave scene grew from the fact that at 2 o'clock, every club in Britain closed, and everyone who was in a club that was playing acid house was on ecstasy. So therefore, you don't finish at 2 o'clock, do you? You want to carry on. Hence, the illegal rave thing came about. Now, the illegal raves that have been happening recently are a result of the fact that clubs are closed. However, the major difference is we didn't have a pandemic hanging over our heads back in the day. I totally understand why young people want to go and party. But the thing is, the illegal raves are delaying the legal return of live entertainment. That's the thing. But then you try and explain that to someone who's 19 and had a few drinks and maybe some drugs aren't as good as they used to be back in the day. They don't care.
No.
So I've been on a lot of radio and television shows, and I've been asked this very thing. And I just know they've been trying to get middle-aged DJ who used to be part of the legal rave scene, gets annoyed at people doing what he did. But it's not, I can't get annoyed. It's just frustrating that they don't see the bigger picture.
Yeah.
But then that's because I'm in my 50s, I'm not in my 20s. And the older you get, the wiser you get, you do. Plus the fact I don't party like I used to anymore. I do sober all the time. And since not drinking while working, I think that's made me more productive and more creative, bizarrely, because the story goes that drinking drugs make you more creative. Well, they might do, but when you do them all your life, they don't. And to be honest, I do think, and this is hindsight, experience, and age tells me that ultimately drinking drugs kind of ruin everything, really. And I've got people who've had their lives ruined by both. So to step back, it's Christmas Day 2016, I thought this can't continue. And that coincided with the second Hacienda Classical show being far better than the first one. You know, there, do your own maths there, fill the blanks in, you see.
I want to catch up to the tracks that you've given us as well. So what we always ask our guests on the House Culture podcast is to submit 5 tracks based on different themes for our perfect playlist on Spotify. It's obviously every single person that we've interviewed has submitted 5 tracks, so it's a huge beast now, but you put it on shuffle and there's so much great stuff in there.
Oh, I'll have to have a look at that.
Yeah, we always kick off with a catalyst one track that, whether it got you into house music or just made you want to move your feet, and you've picked the Fatback Band.
Wiki Wacky, it's just the bass line. And now it was 1974 or 1973, so I would have been 9 or 10. And what I loved about this, I've always had eclectic taste, as I said earlier. So in the early 70s, there was a lot of glam rock, the Sweet, Mud, that glittery man we don't talk about anymore. I remember hearing this on the radio, and just the bass line stood out. But the thing is, that was 74. 15 years later, that kind of open hi-hat is just all over every modern pop and dance and house record.
Yeah.
So I just think it's one of the funkiest things I've ever heard. And I remember, I'm pretty sure it was probably Paul Burnett on Radio 1 probably played it, because he used to sometimes slip in some kind of weird wacky things, wiggy wacky things.
Yeah, it's like pure funk.
But it's so simple.
Yeah.
It's just so simple. It's just drums, bass, and then this hooky vocal. I just love it. I would play that now. In fact, I probably played it in my 12-hour set. I can't remember, but I probably did.
And what's the go-to floor filler for you?
Right, floor filler. You know what? It's difficult because without
the context of a gig.
Well, no, without showing off or without blowing my own trumpet. In the very early days of DJing, occasionally you'd lose the dance floor. Or you'd think, oh my God, I need to drop something to get everyone going. But you see, in the past 20 years or so, 25 years, or certainly since Hacienda, I can't remember ever worrying that I'm losing the dance floor, because it's a craft. You kind of get everyone in and you have to work the crowd and feed off the crowd. But there was one, I was just on my bike this morning thinking, what could I pick? I don't want to pick an obvious one. And then, because I played another track by this band on my radio show recently, I picked Number One Song in Heaven by Sparks, because last time I dropped this, I didn't mix it in. It's got this beautiful vocal introduction before the beat comes in. And then halfway through, it speeds up. It goes from about 118 beats per minute to 130 and goes really electronic and disco. And it just, older heads got it. They were like, oh, it's Sparks. Younger heads were like, what the hell is this? And the crowd went crazy for it. So it's number one song in heaven. It's just one of those records that came on the radio in the 70s, late 70s, lots of punk rock on the radio or on top of the pops. And then this kind of stood out like a beacon of like, what the hell is this? So number one song in heaven is incredible.
Yeah.
Sparks are incredible. They're still around now, and they're still being incredible now.
Yeah. And like you said, to have that moment where the older heads kind of get it and the younger people are like, oh my God, what is this? This is amazing. Yeah, to have
exactly. And of course, what I'm worried now is when you do get records like this, some young producer with Ableton Live will mess with it and ruin it.
And just keep it one flat BPM throughout the whole track and just exactly nullify it.
Yeah. Or sample so much of it and then pass it off as their own thing. I don't get that. Disclosure did it with a Graeme Park track last year and called it their own track. Anyway, carry on, Sunsetter.
Sunsetter. Go on. Tell me about your choice.
I chose a track that might surprise people as a sunset record. Now, I've sat at Cafe Mambo in Ibiza or Cafe Del Mar in Ibiza and watched the sunset and listened to a variety of DJs playing ambient, laid-back grooves with a bit of Spanish guitar and, nice vocals and stuff. That's fine. But I've always taken the view that when the sun's setting, that's the end of the day and we're about to go into the nighttime and go partying. And I'm yet to be convinced that those laid back, beautiful ambient tracks that DJs play when the sun set are appropriate for what's about to happen. I don't think they are. So I've chosen the Larry Levan remix of Gwen Guthrie's Seventh Heaven, because it starts off quite mellow, and as the sun is dipping into the ocean, but then it kind of builds up, and then it kind of and then there's a bit where it says, "We sail across the sea," and the sun's going in, and it gets you kind of ready for what's about to happen, which is go out and get completely smashed in a club. So not your typical sunset record, but for me, if I find myself DJing anywhere soon with the sun setting, I'll try it out. Yeah. Preferably in Ibiza, but not necessarily in Ibiza, because the sun, as I've had to point out to a lot of people in my time, the sun sets all over the world, not just in Ibiza. It's like Ibiza have this monopoly on sunsets. No, they don't. Ibiza doesn't have a monopoly on anything, although when you talk to people who live there or spend months there, which I did for a while, and it's fine. Ibiza's not the centre of the clubbing universe. It's a great island, but there's lots of other great islands. It's a great sunset, but I've seen better sunsets. I do like going to Ibiza, but not for any great length of time. But maybe that's another conversation for another time.
Moving swiftly on, a tearjerker.
Yeah, this is the hardest one to come up with, because I was thinking, oh yeah, there's the songs that are special to me with great lyrics about love and romance or sad things. And then, because I've been thinking about this for a few days, and then the other day, Huey Morgan, who I listened to on Six Music, played this. I thought, oh my God, I was like this. I was in the shower listening to it, going, oh my God, this is amazing. And it's a record that I tried to learn to play along with when I was teaching myself saxophone as a child. And it's A Love Supreme by John Coltrane. It's from the late 50s, I think it's from 58, 57 or 58.
Wow.
But it sounds incredible, and it's a real tingly back of the hairs on the back of the neck song to me. I just think it's incredible.
Yeah.
Not so much a tearjerker, but certainly gets the emotion going. And of course, it's in the days when the tape engineer would go, ready, recording, go. And the band would play, because all the original jazz recordings of the 50s were done in one take. There was no multi-track recording. There was no editing. If somebody made a mistake, then stop the tape, back to the start. This is a true story. In Miles Davis' So What, in the recording of that, the drummer hits a cymbal. He thinks he hits it too hard, but they just carry on recording. When they play it back, yes, he hit it too hard, but it works beautifully.
Yeah.
So now, go and listen to So What by Miles Davis, right? And the way when he goes to like, and that's when the record goes to another level. But the drummer, it was a documentary, and he said, I really wished I'd just hit it gently, but I smashed it. So anyway, that's just like this John Coltrane Love Supremes from that same period, where everyone goes in, let's go, 3, 2, 1, take 2, take 3, and then the best take goes on the album. Great time. I wish now everyone overproduces and copies and pastes and always keeps going back, because you can never finish a record. That's why so many things, every few years, we've got a new mix of it. Because people could sit on a plane, open their laptop and go, I'm going to go back to that track I did 2 years ago and fiddle with it. Yeah. And I just think, why? Yeah. It was a great track. Leave it.
Yeah. And move on to something fresh.
Another conversation for another time.
Yeah, like you said, just to like hit record, and things that it's perfection, you can never achieve it.
No, but that's it. People try and get perfection. Some of my students, when I play them an old Detroit techno record, like an old Derek May record or an old Juan Atkins record, that were made on electronic drums, but those old 808s and 909s, they drift, and then when they edit them, it's on tape, so they splice and stuff. So sometimes an edit's a bit out. Young people go, "Wow, that's a really bad edit." I go, "But it's done on tape, and it's amazing. Yeah, it's raw, it's real." And then they go, "Yeah, well, you could fix that in Ableton or Pro Tools, couldn't you?" I'm like, oh God, yeah.
Well, it's almost like that jazz element, like you said.
Exactly.
Electronically.
Well, I mean, like all of Derek May's original Strings of Life, It Is What It Is, Nude Photo, they were all recorded on 8-track cassette machines.
Yeah.
And edited with the pause button,
That's crazy. Okay, a last tune.
Yeah, right. Sorry to disappoint everyone. I hate last tunes. I know that sometimes people expect them. I've always taken the view that, how long am I playing for? Am I finishing the night? What time do I have to finish? Right. And I will build up to that time, and I will play my set and finish on that time. I just never get the one more tune thing. I always think you're building up to a massive end on a high, and go home on a high. And often, when everyone's chanting for one more, what difference is one more going to make? Anyway, forget that, putting that to one side. If I do get my arm twisted, or the promoter says, go on one more. For example, when we did that COVID safe gig, it was supposed to finish at a certain time, and the guy who owns the hotel said, no, play one more. Well, if the owner of the hotel wants you to play one more, you will. Yeah. But I like to drop a one more tune that no one's expecting. So that's why I've chosen Crush on You by the Jets.
Incredible choice.
It's just a great song. Yeah. But everyone knows it. Yeah. Everyone knows it. It's been sampled, it's been remixed, it's been re-edited, but the original that I've chosen, it's got this great kind of 808 rim shot introduction, and then it's just a great poppy 80s pop dance song, the sort of thing that would appear in a 80s movie, and it's just great.
I mean, I loved that track when it first came. I remember specifically hearing that on the radio and loving it when I was a kid in the 80s, and it was one of those ones where I hadn't heard for a while, and then I did hear it on the radio like maybe about 6 weeks ago, and suddenly realised that it's got that Alan Brack's intro sample on it.
Yeah,
Like, how
yeah,
many
yeah,
times have
yeah.
I heard this song? I've never
I
put that
know.
together. Yeah.
Exactly. But you see, that's an example of a very creative sample.
Mm.
What really annoys me is these days, if somebody samples something, other people go, "Well, I want to know what it is," and then they find out what it is, then they go and sample it and they do something with it. So then you get 5 records with the same sample. I don't get that. But I'm in my 50s, not my 20s, so that's probably why I don't get it. I would have thought if I was a young producer and I heard somebody sample something that was amazing, I would go, "That's amazing," and then for curiosity, find out what the sample is. But the last thing I would do would then go, "Well, I'm going to do something with it." I'd think, "Well, someone's done that. I'll go and find someone else."
Yeah.
That's just me. I don't know.
And just fall down that rabbit hole of creativity and discovery, and like, okay, well, I like this sample. Where'd the sample come from? Oh, it comes from this band I've not heard of, and then just going down and discovering all this. Oh, they made this one thing that
Yeah,
I
yeah,
like, and
yeah,
suddenly opens up this whole
yeah.
new world.
The other thing that annoys me is because a lot of producers now use Logic. That's why a lot of dance records sound the same because they're all
Yeah,
using the same plugins.
yeah,
That's why I use Pro Tools and I sometimes use Cubase. And I avoid Logic. I avoid it.
yeah.
I know it's great, it's fantastic, and it works beautifully on a Mac, but Pro Tools and Cubase. That's my final word on the matter.
Okay, so speaking of final words, we've kind of got to wrap this up. We always have one final question,
Yeah.
which is we are obviously house culture and live for the love of the beat and the camaraderie and the collective euphoria of clubbing. Obviously, it's all on hold at the moment, but
It
it
is.
will return. I mean, you're obviously part of the fabric of house music within the UK and have exported that around the world as well. What does this whole culture and scene mean to you when you look back on it, and what has it brought you in your life, would you say?
Well, I mean, my wife I met through the scene. She was my agent for a while. And without meeting her, I wouldn't have had two twin boys who were almost 16. I've made some amazing friends, but there's lots of people I know that I only ever see in clubs. And over the years, you just get to recognize them, and that's quite nice. It's led me to travel the world without really paying for traveling the world, which is quite nice. In 1989, going to New York, Australia, touring with New Order, supporting New Order. God, I couldn't believe that. It was 1989, and I was told, not asked, told that I was going on tour for 6 weeks with New Order to DJ on the same bill as the Sugar Cubes featuring Bjork,
Yeah.
Public Image Limited featuring John
John
Lydon
Lydon.
slash Johnny Rotten,
Yeah.
and then me DJing for 45 minutes, then New Order. Um,
Wow.
the scene was pretty much everyone made it up as they went along back in the day. It's become a lot more contrived, I think,
Hmm.
but that's the nature with anything that becomes successful. I mean, that's why the Hacienda failed as a club because it was just made up as it went along. So I'm not knocking the fact it's more contrived because it's run beautifully. There are great podcasts for people like yourselves. Technology has democratized the whole scene. You don't have to be supremely well known to go and do stuff now. You can do all right just by being yourself. I think originality might have suffered a bit along the way, but I think during this lockdown, a lot of people have been beavering away and being creative, and some
Hmm.
decent stuff has been made. So it's just great to be part of that scene. And I mean, people say that it's nice to be seen as a pioneer. It's nice to be seen as someone who helped spread the word. But I never really saw it like that. I just got asked to do stuff, and I went and did it and enjoyed it. And it wasn't until the early '90s that I realised that maybe I was kind of making an impression. And it's nice that after 35 years, man and boy, I'm still getting asked by people like you to take part in things like this, which is quite cool. But I just focus on my own thing, and I think if
Hmm.
people just focus on their own thing and stop worrying about what everyone else is doing, I think everyone would be much happier. Don't stress about things that aren't really worth stressing about. Don't don't read DJ's charts on track source. Who cares?
Yeah, just do your own thing. Like you said, I think the overriding output of this has been, just be yourself and do your own thing and have faith in that. Yeah, like you said.
But importantly, enjoy it. If you can make a career out of it and make a living out of it, like I have, happy days. But if you love it, I mean, like at the moment, I've got no income, but I still do my radio show, do some live streams, and just enjoy it.
Mm-hmm.
And I did enjoy the time off. I'm getting very frustrated now, but I've got some gigs on the horizon. This is a little blip in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah.
Easy for me to say. I know that some people have really suffered financially, and some people have really suffered with their mental health. So people like that should be supported and helped. But fast forward 12 months, and another thing about getting older is time flies past so quickly. So this past 7 months has probably seemed a lot quicker to someone who's half my age, I think. And the plus side for me, I've always been a keen mountain biker, but now instead of going out 2 or 3 times a week, since lockdown, I've been out religiously every other morning and sometimes 2 days in a row. Great. 60k, 70k, through the woods, through the mud, on the coast. I love it.
Reconnecting with nature, I think a lot of people have found that.
It sorts your head out. It does.
Well, I think that's a great place to kind of end on.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for having me.
No, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for finding the time
You're
and
welcome.
sitting down with us.
Cool. Thanks.
House culture.
Thank you, Graeme. What did you think, guys? Absolutely loved chatting to him, getting a real overview of the explosion of our scene told by a DJ who has seen it all and is still doing the damage on the dance floor to this day. Let's all keep our fingers crossed that the Hacienda event we talked about, the one currently scheduled for Easter 2021 at Tobacco Dock in London, goes ahead as planned. If it does, I'll see you down the front. I must also pass on my congratulations to Graeme for winning the Innovation Award at the recent Scottish Music Awards. This was for his involvement with the Hacienda Classical event, and I cannot wait to see how much this has improved when they relaunch it sometime soon. As usual, you can find all of Graeme's choices for our perfect playlist over on Spotify. All you need to do is open up your Spotify player, search for House Culture Perfect Playlist, and here you will find all of the tunes that Parkie and I chatted about, as well as submissions from all of our previous podcast guests. Make sure you follow it to stay up to date with what is now a huge selection of stone cold classics, forgotten gems and new discoveries. Once you've tucked into all of those tunes, please help support the House Culture podcast by loving, liking, tweeting, sharing and rating or reviewing us on Apple. As I always say, this last bit is really important. Please help make a difference. If you say something good, we'll give you a shout out on the next episode. This time around, the shout out goes to Jeff Sill, who left us the most amazing review on Apple, saying that being a straightforward music nut, he's never bothered with podcasts before. However, he absolutely loves what we're doing and is now hooked as our conversations have brought back so many positive memories. Thanks for those lovely words, Jeff. Reading those made my day. Make sure you get yourself ready for what will be our final episode in Season 2, which is an epic chat with a huge DJ famous for his marathon sets. I can't say any more than that, apart from I guarantee that you will not want to miss this one. And to make sure you don't miss out on that, hit up our Instagram feed at HouseCultureNet or follow the hashtag TrueHouseCulture. Doing so will get you connected to other house music lovers the world over. And finally, don't forget, if you want to get in touch with me, Matt Rouse, you can contact me directly on Instagram at DJ Matt Rouse. Thanks for listening, stay safe, and see you next time.
House culture.